La descarbonización, la digitalización y la diversificación están cambiando los modelos de minería y creando nuevas oportunidades. Esto significa que la minería en el futuro será muy diferente a la de hoy. ¿Pero qué cambiará exactamente y cómo pueden adaptarse los mineros? Imaginemos una mina del futuro.
Let's imagine mining of the future.
Para el 2040,
By 2040, artificial intelligence will make exploration possible and profitable for new discoveries. Everything will be automated, trucks and support equipment, and it will improve safety, automation, and electrification, making deeper access to underground mines. Responses can be printed in 3D, spare parts as needed. Micro networks will make it possible to have renewable energy, reducing costs and carbon emissions. Future mines will not use water, which will help with licenses to operate and sustainability. About 3/4 of the roles will be redesigned or improved, and much of the mining labor will be working remotely through integrated operating centers. Transforming for the future will fundamentally require remodeling operational and commercial models. EY is helping mining companies to adopt a holistic approach to drive a truly digital strategy and create trust partnerships to attract capital and think about new ways for the labor force to work with skills and a flexible mentality to unlock opportunities offered by mining of the future.
Muy buenos días. A nombre de
Good morning. On behalf of EY and the Cesco Office for Mining, I want to welcome you to the Future of Mining event, Forecasts and Projections 2040. I am Eduardo Valente. I am a partner lead of mining at EY, working with mining and energy, and I want to say a warm welcome to all of our participants who are here with us to learn about new mining and energy, and you can visit our websites to learn more about that. We are facing challenges to attract capital for new projects, and it's affecting lots of different economic sectors. Mining is no exception. So we have to think about regulatory matters and ESG and commodities and how all of that will impact mining in the upcoming decades and how we can harness the opportunities made available by technologies to leverage everything that will come. And we are here today to talk about those topics, to hear about the Future of Mining 2040 approach from EY, which reflects 4 scenarios about how supply and demand and prices may evolve and the potential impact of regulation on the sector. We will be having questions and answers coming in through a WhatsApp question number, and we will be available to answer them. And our panel guests at the end can also answer those questions. This event will take place in English and Spanish. You can pick your language if you like. At the bottom of your screen, there's an interpreting option where you can choose to hear the original audio, the floor audio, or you can choose English if you want to hear everything in English, or Spanish if you prefer to hear everything in Spanish. So I now invite Juan Carlos Jobet, the biministro of Mining and Energy, to give us his remarks about the vision of the government and the present and future of mining in Chile. Good morning, Minister. Good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation. Congratulations to EY for holding this event, and I'm very grateful to EY for giving me this opportunity. I think it's a very good moment to have a discussion about the future of mining. And I'm going to try to focus my initial reflections on copper, which is our top mining product for export in Chile. And I'm going to take about 10 minutes to talk about some of the main challenges and opportunities facing the sector in the future. Let me begin by giving a little bit of a side remark before I go into my presentation. At the end of the 80s, there was a professor and an expert in international relations, and he developed a concept that we're still using nowadays. It's called soft power. That's the concept, soft power. And soft power thinks about the influence of the United States in different areas, and there's a separation between hard power and soft power. So hard power might be like the American type of power. They can influence other actors through methods like coercion. You can think about military power. Of course, the United States has economic power, international institutions. The World Bank is one example. And the United States can obviously mobilize actions through what we might call quote unquote force. But we also can understand that soft power is a big part of the American influence in the world, and it could be just as important as hard power. So these categories might include things like values, culture, the ability of the United States to wield that soft power to shape and to form and to sculpt the attitudes and preferences of other people. And that might be a more intangible, soft channel for the United States to influence the future of the world. And I'm bringing this idea up because the United States has had that capacity to influence the world through its culture, through its universities, through its films, through its literature, and it makes the country very, very important. And I think this is sort of the heart of what I'm trying to say. I think mining in general and mining in Chile specifically has an enormous opportunity from here on out. And in order to harness those opportunities, we have to face hard challenges, and we might be very well prepared for those. We might be ready, we might have everything we need, but there's also a lot of soft challenges ahead of us. And my impression is that those soft challenges, those soft threats are what mining really needs to be working on. That's where we should be putting our focus in order to be successful and ready for the future. I think this is an opportunity that is very clearly outlined. We know what it is for copper. It's part of the economic agenda to accelerate the economy. And it's also part of the climate agenda, which is becoming increasingly important, gaining ground, especially over the past few months with the change of administration in the United States, with efforts from Japan and other major economies. We're seeing the climate change is going to keep gaining ground. The demand for copper and other metals is going to continue rising. I think lots of other analysts, some have more optimistic and some have less optimistic forecasts, but I think over the next decade and the next decades, I think there's a general consensus that it's going to rise in demand. We're going to see about 2 to 3% rise in copper, a sustained rise in demand over the upcoming years, which is going to give us an amazing opportunity for the industry, copper being our top export product to the rest of the world. So returning back to that idea, there's going to be concrete, hard opportunities, increase the volume of sale. We're probably going to see an impact on price, better returns for investors, better outcomes. But we have to be aware not only of that and taking advantage of those opportunities, but also thinking about the soft opportunities. And I think mining has to confront or tackle these soft opportunities in a stronger way. And that might be things like changing mindsets, working with communities, communicating how important mining is for the future, and slowing climate change. We not only need more renewable energy and more infrastructure for loading, charging with the electrical supply, but we also have to do it better. And without copper, we're not going to be able to stop climate change or slow climate change. So that's where we need to communicate that really strongly. That's a soft opportunity, that sense of purpose. And I think mining is not doing everything it could do in that area, and we have to pick it up stronger. It's going to make mining has often, in the past been open to criticism, but I think this soft opportunity can help position mining as an essential actor in the world in the future, and an opportunity to connect to future generations, which are very sensitive and very aware, very conscious of the challenges we're facing than perhaps our older generations. So there's an enormous opportunity for mining that we need to leverage more strongly than we have been doing. In order to leverage this rising demand, we're obviously going to have a rise in supply. And that's a gigantic challenge if we think about how laws have been changing and regulations. So we have to embrace every opportunity that technology can be there. That's going to be essential to raise productivity, and to boost growth and maintain current production and even increase it. And I think EY is going to talk about this also in the future. I think everyone in mining understands that competitiveness is going to be fundamental. We're going to need more technology. And I think we've heard this very well from EY before. In the video, we just saw automation, processes, safety for workers. These are enormous opportunities. And in order to take advantage of them, we need a set of solutions. As we said at the beginning, mining can address these, and it's a part of the culture change as well. I think a lot of these things are already underway, and I'm certain that we will continue to do them. Mining also has a sustainability challenge. We heard this in the introductory remarks, but mining is also doing well in some areas. We are moving away from carbon-based energy supply to renewable energy supply. By the end of this decade, I think more than 90% of the carbon sources are going to be gone from our matrix, especially from the lead companies. In terms of water, we're also seeing a lot of efforts being done. We're going to see 50% of water recovery in Chile. We're going to see seawater recovery up to 50%. We're thinking about the circular economy. We're thinking about recycling. And mining, I think, it's very much in their DNA. This is the type of thing that mining does really well. We think about tailings processing. I think there's a lot of topics in which mining is very competent and mining is doing a good job. I think one of the big challenges facing the mining industry from here on out is perhaps a challenge further away than what mining is used to doing. It's going to be a social and political challenge. It's happening in Chile and it's happening in other countries. And it's happening in different ways around the world. Chile is closing a development cycle. It's been very successful. There's a lot of tasks ahead, but that cycle has been successful at the end of the day, if you think about a 30-year cycle. But we're starting a new cycle now. And in this new cycle, citizen demands, population demands for industries that have a clear purpose, for industries that are responsible and know how to work in a sustainable and transparent way with communities, companies that have the capacity to explain to people why they should exist, to justify their reason for existence. Sometimes mining sites can cause issues for communities, but companies have to be able to explain why they should be there, and it becomes an essential part of their work. There's also a constitutional issue in Chile, and this week there's going to be an election to choose the people who will be drafting our new constitution. And that process, I think mining can't look at it as just an isolated technical legal challenge. Mining has to be an active voice in that process. We need to have arguments and be an active voice in that conversation. And that's about the Constitution. That Constitution is just one piece of the puzzle. It's one stage, it's one process in a much larger, longer, deeper process in which the capacity of mining to connect to that sense of purpose, to tell their story in a good way, is going to be essential. It's not just about the constitutional lawyers. It's about people understanding why we need more and better mining. Think about royalties as one topic. You see copper prices go up, you see people in the Congress and talking about royalties and discussions. The direction that conversation is taking to me is concerning. But that discussion is the result, in part, of political actors in the Congress who have come up with ideas without any technical analysis, without taking into account technical data. And it can also be a symptom of some more moderate actors who are not brave enough to raise their hand and say, no, this is going to cause problems for the country. It's also a symptom of the lack of connection between the overall population and the mining sector. There's a gap there. If you look at how big the mining sector is, 50% of exports, 10% of GDP, 300,000 direct and indirect jobs, there's a very there should be a very direct connection, but there's a gap between the size of the industry and the general population. People don't know much about the sector. We have to close that gap. And that's going to put mining in a stronger position. If we don't do that, we will be in a fragile position in the political and social realms in the upcoming years. So in my opinion, for reasons that I'm happy to discuss at another point in time, we have the possibility to make this work. Oftentimes, mining tends to go off in a silo and just say, okay, we're doing good enough. Sometimes the structures are too focused on their own supplies. Okay, we have to deal with our health issues, our sanitation issues, our transportation. They just worry about their own problems. And sometimes that can be exacerbated and worsen the disconnect between the mining sector and the general population. So in the years to come, we have to take advantage of the opportunities. We have all the tools at our disposal. We have to be more sustainable. We have to be more connected. It's a lot about strengthening our linkages, our connection, our relationship with the general population. Chileans need to understand why we need more and better mining. And leadership from the mining sector has to be diversified, especially from my opinion. We can have very positive results. We need to have a more porous sector with more participation, more diversity to see new angles, new visions that may be different from the more traditional vision in the industry. I also think that mining should show off its diversity. When we talk about royalties, for example, it's very easy to just say, oh, mining is just a small handful of big multinational corporations, but that's so disconnected from reality. The mining sector is extremely diverse. We've got small-sized companies, medium-sized companies, state-owned companies, foreign companies, consultants, engineers, so many different people involved. But we have to show that side. We have to do the work to show off the diversity of the mining sector. And we can't just hide in our mining sites. We just can't run away there. If we stay in our silo, we can't take advantage of the opportunity to make partnerships and closer relationships with other stakeholders in society. We need to act with conviction. And we don't need to, oftentimes we have this sort of sense of guilt in conversations. It doesn't have to be a transactional conversation. It's about tracing a path forward with a sense of unity and commitment. And I think if we do that, in both the public and private sector, we are going to be able to harness the enormous opportunities of the future and position mining in a place that it deserves in the conversation with a vision of Chile that is more prosperous and more sustainable in the future. So I invite you to join me in this work. Thank you for the invitation today and congratulations to EY for this event. Thank you so much to the minister for his remarks. I feel very motivated. I feel very excited about copper in Chile. I think it will be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And it's going to put us in a great position to keep growing in the future. Many of the points in your remarks are going to come up again during the discussion with our panel group. And thank you again to the minister. We send you our warmest greetings. Thank you. I now want to invite our EY Global Mining and Metals lead, who is sitting in Australia. He's going to be offering us an analysis of the future of mining. Paul, the floor, we're asking if you can hear us.
Hello, everyone. It's certainly a great privilege to be opening for such a distinguished panel, and really great to be back talking to the members of Cesco. I wish I could be there in Chile with you, but these troubling times continue, and I hope you and your families have kept well. I'm going to start by setting the scene with a presentation that we've put together on the future of mining, and we've focused it on 2040. And I'll explain a little bit later why we picked 2040. I think it gives us a nice time frame to work within. So before we think about what's going to happen in the mining industry, we need to think about how the world's going to change. And certainly if we look at the last year, there's been such significant change in the world that I think that this will be no surprise to anyone. Every year we produce a document that we call megatrends. which goes through and says, what are the major factors that are going to impact the world that we live in? We didn't predict a pandemic in 2019, but we've certainly taken that into account as we think through what's going to impact mining by 2040. If we think about those things that are going to impact the world, there are a number that are really easy to predict, and there are some that could go in a number of ways. So if we think about what those that are really easy to predict, I think it's obvious now that focus on environment, social and governance factors is going to continue to rise. The increased focus on carbon in the last 6 to 12 months has been unprecedented in my time in the industry. We're going to see access to capital for extractive industries continue to be complex. Digital and technology will become business as usual. I think we're already starting to see that now, so I don't think that's a 2041. We think post-COVID, and as we transition to cleaner energy, we're going to see increased demand for the minerals that we produce. Copper is going to have a continued strong run as we work forward. The requirements for copper for its antimicrobacterial matters and for the future of energy transmission has been well established. What's often less thought about is the demand that's going to continue for products like iron ore. The infrastructure required for energy transition is huge and really underestimated in terms of what's there. Post-COVID, governments are going to switch from continuing to support consumer spending to supporting infrastructure, and that's just going to increase that demand. So we think it's going to be really good times for the mining industry. Purpose and transparency is going to increase as society becomes more future-looking, but also has greater expectations on the mining industry. And of course, I can't forget the first point we've got on this slide, which is really important, which is that declining head grades and more complex replacement resources will really impact the way that our industry looks. As I mentioned, there are then some factors that are more complex to sort of understand. License to operate has been our top risk for the last 3 years in the mining industry. What's uncertain is how governments will respond to that. Will government responses be coordinated or will they be uncoordinated? I think as we've seen over the last year or so, and particularly in relation to tailings dam standards, is that government responses will be more coordinated. There's already discussion about consistent taxation systems around the world that's been led by the Biden government, and we think this will apply to other legislative frameworks. Global GDP, will it slow or will it continue to grow? We think it will continue to grow, and growth in global GDP is critical to demand in the mining industry. The other factor that we do have to take into account is geopolitics. What's going to happen between the relationships and relative positions of the US, China, and the EU? Given those factors, we then developed 4 scenarios for 2040. Survival of the fittest, race to the lowest cost, pushing global frontiers, or new economy, new miners. We think the scenario that's most likely is new economy, new miners. So, governments will be coordinating their responses and license to operate will become complex and will become consistent across the world. Mining companies will need to critically assess license to operate and the relationship they have. And we believe this will see new entrants into the industry as it becomes too complex for some miners to continue. But the good news is we think global growth will continue to increase and that this will be extremely positive for commodity prices as we go on. Now, whether we're going to have copper at $10,000 for the next few years is way too hard to predict, but I certainly think the prices are going to be good. So we've based what we think mining 2040 will look like on that scenario, that we will have continued growth, new entrants to the industry, and an industry that continues to prosper as time goes on, but prospers under increased scrutiny from others. The other thing I did want to mention is why we picked 2040. I think if we look further out, so if we go to 2060 or 2070, we could see radical change in the way that resources are extracted. So direct leaching might become a reality, equipment might be completely changed, and those sorts of factors could start to come into account. By 2040, we don't think some of those changes will have come in. So the things we're starting to see now will become business as usual, but we won't see radical change in the way that minerals are extracted. Just a little bit on that before we go through what's there. So this is our industry journey, and I know you've all seen our video at the start of this meeting. So let me go through and just explain some of those things that are on there. So if we think through by 2040, some of the big ore bodies that we know of today will have been closed and will disappear. So for instance, if we think of copper, Bingham Canyon will have closed in the US. Some of the mines that are currently operating and currently dominating production in the Atacama will have closed and will have moved on to the next mines. What do we think those mines will look like? Well, there are some big unexplored copper deposits. A number of the other deposits that we're going to find and we're going to be able to extract from are going to be quite different to the ones we use today. They're going to be smaller, so they're not going to last for the 30, 40 years that we've been used to. They might last 2 or 3 years. They might last 5 years, but certainly much smaller than the time that we've seen to date. With those smaller resources, we're going to have to be more mobile, more nimble, and more agile in the way we mine. We also think that there's going to be different complexities. So if we're going to be mining those smaller ore bodies, they're going to be different. But we've already invested a huge amount of capital in processing technology for those resources. So are we going to completely replace the processing technology, the smelters, the refineries that we use today, or are we going to change the way that we mine? We think it's going to be a little mix, but we think mainly we're going to change the way we mine. So as we're moving towards these smaller ore bodies, what we think we'll actually do in the future is mine multiple ore bodies at once. So rather than a mine being one big pit that's continuous, we mine within that pit. We think that a more likely mine of the future is one that has multiple pits or multiple undergrounds open at any one time that are dispersed over a space. So just think of a mine that's dispersed over 50, 100 kilometres along the Atacama. It's spaced out and you have to move between those. And to get the optimal material to put through your processing plant, you're going to have to mine from multiple sources at one time so you can blend it for the right consistency to be able to go through your processing plant. So quite a different looking mine as we sort of go forward. So that first concept I think is quite important. What we think that will see is a real change in the equipment that we use to mine. So it will lead us to smaller mobile equipment. So rather than using 200, 300 ton trucks, we think we'll move to something less than 100 tons. That will mean that we'll have more and that we'll have a mobile fleet. It'll be able to move over that land, be able to move easily at greater speed with less breakdowns and less damage to the environment that's around it. We'll probably have flexible and modular processing, particularly at the front end. So your crushing circuit might have to be modular. You might have modular crushing at each of those pits that you've got open. So 5 or 6 pits open over 100 kilometres with crushing at each of them and perhaps even primary processing at each of them. So quite a different mine that all then comes back to a central point to be processed. If we've got mines that are operating over 50 or 100 kilometres, license to operate is going to get even harder because we're going to have more communities that we're impacting, we're going to have more people, more space, more environment that we're going to move, more biodiversity in terms of those sort of things. So it's going to become even more complex. That could lead to where we have to have different companies mining. So we could start to see a switch to national mining companies because it becomes too hard for corporate entities to be able to mine those. We think the biggest corporate entities will survive, but maybe some of the smaller ones, it will just become too complex for them to operate in terms of what's there. As governments move to operating mines or doing something different, the mining industry is not in a place that the oil and gas industry is in, where we've got a Schlumberger or a Halliburton that can operate those mines for them. So we think mining as a service is something that the mining companies are going to start to offer. So mining as a service rather than mining mines with someone else owning the land. That could be a government, that could be a community, that could be a customer that decides we need to get more copper because we have our energy transition. We need to get lithium because we're a car company that needs batteries. We're going to own that resource and we're going to contract a mining as a service company to be able to do that for us. Alternative sources of capital, like automotive companies providing that and mining for us, could be a way that we continue to access capital when pension funds and those sort of things are going to be far less likely to be able to contribute to our industry as we go forward. We think that smaller equipment, mobile equipment, is going to be automated, and very much so it's going to be electrified. So we won't run it on diesel, we won't have diesel fumes and those sort of things having an impact on employees. We'll have smaller automated equipment. Because it's smaller, it'll be able to be automated and it'll be able to be electrified much easier because we won't have the capacity issues that we have with batteries, we won't have the asset management issues that we have with batteries. If it's automated, we'll be able to use things like tag-along technology. So if you think of that mine stretched out over 100 kilometres, you'll have little groups of half a dozen trucks that tag along with each other and move between the mines and disperse when they get to the mine and then come back. So it's almost like a conveyor belt without the conveyor, as we sort of think through. If we're going to electrify equipment, it's going to have to be lower carbon energy. And I know the mining industry in Chile has done a fantastic job on renewable energy. That is going to continue and it's going to spread around the world. The complexity is going to be when you try and get that lower carbon energy in places where they're not as fortunate as you in Chile or in Australia, and they don't have sun as much of the year. So how are we going to get renewable energy in a place like far north in Canada or the far north of Russia or the Nordics or places like that? We're going to have to come up with ways to get cheaper, low carbon energy for those places. We then think through how we're going to maintain those assets. Having warehouses that are spread over that period is just not going to be reasonable. So we think that 3D printing of spares and those sort of things is going to actually start to come into its own because warehouses will become impractical in terms of the way we do it. Jobs are going to change. Without a doubt, we're going to see different jobs. If we've got automated equipment, we're not necessarily going to have operators who operate machinery with the machinery. Operations is going to be from a central point. They're probably going to be integrated. So the operators of that equipment are going to sit with the operators of the other equipment and new jobs will arise. We actually think that as this journey continues, as the industry continues to grow with that increased GDP that we talked about, while there are new jobs, we think that the ability to maintain employment in the industry will continue, and we're not going to see huge job losses. We'll see job differences, but not job losses. And then because we're over this broad area, we're going to have ways to have a very low environmental impact. So we're going to have to be very conscious about not using water, about not disrupting the environment, about maintaining biodiversity in the places that we work. If we then think a little bit about customers and what we're going to do, we think that the premium for high quality products is going to continue. So, we're going to continue to see a great time for iron ore mines in South America. The premium that's paid for high ferrous iron ore is going to continue. And for base metals, we think we're going to see more SKUs, so more different specialist products as we go on. And we think that we're going to see this diversity of products for the copper industry continue as well. Particularly products for energy transition is going to be very, very interesting. We do also think that trading is going to be quite different. So a lot of product gets sold to traders. Trading is going to become quite interesting as trading is done on artificial intelligence. So individual trading events won't create volatility, but when there are events that artificial intelligence can't predict, so like a major weather event or a major disaster, those are going to have a huge impact on commodity prices, because artificial intelligence won't be able to cope with those sort of events and will react accordingly. You know, think through sell downs on financial markets during the global financial crisis. We think those sort of things will start to impact more as we see trading done online. And the final point is we think there'll be far more sharing of infrastructure. So we think as we're displacing more area, as we're impacting more communities, we're going to see infrastructure shared with communities. So when we think of that, we don't think about infrastructure as being old world infrastructure, like, you know, the community is not going to want to use your railway line, you're not going to want to necessarily use all of your roads or those sort of things. But what your community around you is going to want to use is some of the infrastructure that enables this mine of 2040. Wi-Fi is a great example. Being able to provide Wi-Fi access to people and communities around your mine is going to be a great way to be able to help you manage communities and address licence to operate issues. So quite a different looking mining industry, but quite an exciting future with continued growth and continued development of the way that mining companies operate. I'm going to hand back to Eduardo now, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. It's a fantastic panel that's been assembled for you today. Thank you very much for listening to me. Over to you, Eduardo.
Muchas gracias, Paul. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to Paul. That was a great presentation to understand how we imagine mining from here to 2040, mining of the future. We can see that there are so many conclusions, so many starting points, and it's a great framework for the future of mining. I now want to invite Alejandra Wood, who's the Executive Director of Cesco, and she will be moderating our panel that's coming up. So Alejandra, good morning. I think Alejandra's microphone is on mute. Alejandra. That still happens sometimes. Good morning. Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you to all of our participants and speakers. It's been a great conversation this morning, very interesting, and it's a very timely conversation as well, given the moment our country is experiencing and the zeitgeist of mining right now. I think it's very interesting to hear the remarks from Minister Jobet, where we heard him speak about hard and soft power, which are both necessary for mining. And then we heard Paul's presentation, and we got a lot of insights around what might be happening in the sector in the future. So now we're going to have a conversation about these highlights from those other remarks. We've got an excellent panel ahead of us this morning, and I'm going to briefly introduce our panel members. We have Ragnar Udd, who is the president of BHP Minerals Americas, and he has a master's degree in engineering. He has more than 20 years of experience in the natural resources industry. He's in both in Australia and the Americas. He joined BHP in 1997, and since 2018, he has been serving as the Vice President of Transformation for Global Technology, and then starting at the end of 2019, the Technology Director. Before BHP, he had other roles in the base metal industries. So Mr. Ragnar Udd, welcome to the conversation. And Eduardo Valente is our next panel members. You guys already know him. He's the lead partner for mining and energy at EY. He has a degree from Brazil and an MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management. He's got more than 20 years of experience in consulting, and he's worked for large companies in Chile, Peru, Australia, and Brazil, leading strategy and project and program implementation and strategic excellence, working with technology for mining sector companies. And our final panel member is Mr. Osvaldo Urzúa, who's the director of Cesco. He has a PhD and more than 20 years of experience. He's also a consultant in the mining sector, dealing with challenges in project implementation and open pit mining and collective action programs and designing and implementing public policy for innovation, productivity, and local development. And he's currently working as an independent consultant as well. So good morning to all of our panel members. Before I invite our panel members to speak, I just want to remind everybody you can keep sending your questions in to the WhatsApp telephone number on the screen. And then we will proceed as follows. I will pose a question to all of our panel members, and then we will get specific questions for each panel members. So I will be asking questions first to the panel members, and then we will be taking questions from the audience. So we are going to start because time is flying. So my first question for everyone. We have seen that there are quite a few factors affecting the future of mining, like depletion of resources and capital, transformation of technology, ESG, geopolitical challenges, regulatory challenges, and more. What do you think are the most important challenges for Chile right now? So Ragnar, you can start.
Thanks, Alejandra, and a real pleasure to be with you here today. Look, longer term for myself, I think all of these topics are relevant, and I'd probably add the trends of electrification and decarbonization as being some mega trends that I see are going to hugely influence basically where we go as overall as an industry and also as a society. Now, I think all of these are salient, and an organization, you must stay attuned to the trends that are playing out across the globe to understand the shift in industry and also how we can differentiate as individual companies and industries moving forward. So rather than choosing one key topic, I'd say that I think taking a coordinated action towards a common and shared vision will be a decisive factor. And if I was to give you a couple examples, you can't think about environment without thinking about communities and how that impacts. You can't design an effective governance system without establishing ambitious climate change goals. And so I think it's so important more and more to understand the interconnectedness between each roles that governments, communities, suppliers, companies play in the market that we're working forward. Now, look, I do think that ESG is going to be a game changer. I think that climate change specifically is a big piece for us. And that's something that we need to make sure that we have high performance in this area. ESG for us will be a non-negotiable. I think mining as a whole has a reputation as a dirty industry. And I think that is something that we can change by demonstrating all the great work that we already do as an industry. And I think Chile is a fantastic spot to demonstrate that. Now, Alejandra, one thing I did maybe spend a little bit going on a bit of a tangent. You did mention an inflection in your question about today. And I see the next year as a crucial period in Chile with discussions that are going to shape the industry for our future. For a company like BHP, institutional and country stability is key. And I really am deeply respectful to the debate that's actually taking place in Chile. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity to design together our future based on a competitive and more sustainable mining industry. Now, if you take a look at how taxes contribute to that or royalties, they are a cornerstone in terms of building a strong and long-lasting industry. So more mining implies more investment, and more investment requires institutional, legal, and tax stability. If you take a look at the last 15 years in Chile, grades have declined significantly. So going from over 1% copper down to almost 0.6% grade. In an ore grade declining scenario, we need to work harder, we need to find new ways to be competitive, and we need to increase our productivity. Now at BHP, we've invested tens of billions of dollars over the last decade to actually stay competitive. And if we hadn't, our portfolio would have been about half the size of what it is today. And we are the third largest producer of copper in the world. If some of the current proposals go forward that are suggested at the moment, in a world where Chile's effective taxation rates will double and become significantly higher than any other country in the world, it's hard to see how Chile will continue to grow in mining. And so for myself, being very pro-Chile, I'd like to understand how we can actually influence this to actually create a world where it benefits all in Chile going forward, and mining contributing to that. Thank you, Alejandra.
Muchas gracias, Ragnar. Muy interesante.
Thank you so much, Ragnar. Those are really interesting and appropriate reflections. We can see that the next year is going to be very key, and the context is an opportunity to talk about mining with all Chileans. I think that was the suggestion of the minister. So I would now like to offer Eduardo the floor. What do you think are the key challenges for Chile right now? The three most important are a little bit hard to point out. I think all of the challenges are important if we think about the future. I'm very much aligned with what Ragnar said. What I think is going to continue to be a priority for mining companies and for governments are ESG topics. If we think about ESG, we're seeing social permits, the licenses to operate continue to be an area where the governments and the communities and the companies need to work together hand in hand to maintain stability, transparency, productive relations, and productive engagement with the environment in which mining is located. And a second point, which I think right now, especially in the upcoming year, 2 years, I fully agree with Ragnar, it's going to be very important to think about the political and tax environment. I know we are going to be talking about it a little bit further on, so I don't want to go too deep into it. Royalties are another topic, but what we can do is leverage the brilliant future that the minister painted for us before, where Chile and copper become the cornerstone of solving climate change problems, where electrification reaches all countries to harness these opportunities. I think we're sitting on a unique opportunity in our history. We have to have that political stability. We have to have it so that companies can invest, because the key is investment. If we look back to 2009, there hasn't been any big greenfield projects in Chile. So as Ragnar has said, we're seeing the grade of copper on the decline. The only way to continue mining copper in a sustainable fashion and an environmentally friendly fashion is going to be investing. And you need an environment. If you've got an environment where the future is uncertain, obviously investment is not going to flow. The final thing I want to comment on is people. I think it's essential for mining companies to invest in a cultural change to adopt these new technologies. We're seeing a lot of companies implementing remote operating centers, integrated centers, and in 5 years from now, it's going to be business as usual, even if it seems like an innovation right now. This is going to be the new way to do business, more technology, more remote work. It's going to be the new normal in our day-to-day life. Thank you so much, Eduardo. I will now ask Osvaldo for his opinion. What do you think are the key challenges for Chile today? Good morning. Thank you, Alejandra. I heard the other two panelists. I think they're confirming some of the hypotheses we heard from the minister. There's sort of saying something similar. So we're in right now kind of a vicious cycle. Sometimes we only listen to ourselves and we get stuck in our own silo, and that can be part of the problem, that we continue to have conversations with ourselves rather than being open and opening the discussion to other opinions and other interpretations to help other people understand us and also for us to understand other people. Specifically going to your question, Alejandra, if we think about what's happening, we're in a kind of watershed moment right now, a change of time. That's what the analysts are saying. There's a lot of uncertainty about what the most important factors are going to be. It's super hard to pick just one. So rather than focusing on one factor, I would say it's prudent to be ready for lots of different scenarios, like EY has said. You can define different scenarios based on different factors, and that study gave some of those factors. So as I said, I think it's good to look at those 4 scenarios and to keep in mind an analysis of how competitiveness might change depending on the risks and what strategies you could undertake to ameliorate the cost curve, for example, and what options might be available to mitigate risks in one year versus another. So if you've got a scenario that says there's a preference for low emissions mining, then there's a high price for carbon, then that was in 2 of the studies. You could think about companies or countries that have access to low emission energy are going to be more competitive if they've got access to green energies. Or if they've got carbon capture options, they could be more competitive and they might see their competitive advantage strengthened before the industry. So you could do an analysis like that for all of the scenarios and figure out how appealing or how resilient one country or one company might be versus the others, depending on which scenario comes to be. And these analyses can also point to strategies and actions to strengthen competitive advantages, especially if you think about ways to mitigate or compensate emissions. Water is another topic, capacity building to become more productive, the tax issue to encourage investment for opportunities. 2 other factors that I want to underline. I think in the future they will be even more visible. The first is about working together in policy and strategy. This is about the soft power side of things. There needs to be a model of engagement, of liaising with people to get away from a transactional mindset if we're thinking about soft power. I think the way that we engage is going to be a factor in order to implement the actions we want to. This is not only mining, but the way that people perceive mining and the way society perceives mining is going to be very important. The second factor, if we're thinking longer term, the decade toward 2040, like the study, is secondary urban mining and its impact on primary. If we think about the 2040 to 2050 timeframe, if we're going to mining as a service, we might have a scenario where the mining sector is leasing ore to be recirculated, and the circular economy is going to be very key there. So secondary production or secondary ore mining could be very competitive, especially compared to primary mining, and that could affect the value and relative position of the current producers. That's what I want to say. Thank you. Thank you, Osvaldo. That was very interesting. Eduardo, I want to begin with a question for you. If we think about the capital situation, there's a lot of competition going on for capital between different industrial sectors. And mining is competing not just with other mining countries, but also competing with companies like Google and Amazon and Tesla. We know that there has been a historical challenge to attract capital for the mining sector. There's very intense competition. What does Chile have to do to bring investment? And keeping in mind ESG issues, please. I'm going to divide the question into 2 parts. First, I want to talk about mining companies themselves, what mining companies have to do. So obviously, the mining companies have a long-standing history of doing development, of doing investment, and they've done really interesting work to get to the state of the art in technology, in efficiency. If we think about the next leap forward into the future, how can we continue developing mining and pushing mining forward using less water, having a smaller environmental footprint, using less energy? The only way to do it is innovating. These are new problems. These are problems we have not faced before. And right now, we need a vision to solve them innovatively. We can think about technologies that are available, the entire ecosystem. Just this week, I was talking with some universities in Chile where we've got a very big gap between places like us and places like Australia, where in Australia, there's better linkages between universities and mining to solve the problem. Here, we're more isolated. In Australia, they're thinking about how in universities they can help mining grow and recover and improve like copper recovery. If we think about low grade, improving productivity for mining in the future. And this means that we cannot leave aside the social issues. We cannot forget them. We cannot forget communicating with our communities. We cannot forget good governance. We have to continue to be appealing to investors. Now, if we look at Chile specifically as a country, this is what we were talking about before. If we do not have an environment in which investors are excited to invest and know that mining is going, well, we know that mining has a lot of capital required, but if they don't know that it's going to be really profitable, think about how much capital we need to get a project, a greenfield project going from zero to actually being profitable. Think about the environment. So to be honest, there is a very clear need for the country, for Chile, for the government, for the parliament to all line up, to talk to the companies. And I think Osvaldo alluded to this a little bit. We need to work together to define what is the basic framework for tax, for processes, so that Chile as a country is and will continue to be attractive to investors, so they will continue to want to help grow mining in Chile. Thank you so much, Eduardo. You were talking about what Rag said.
Interaction between public sphere, civil society, and so on. I'd like to go back to the sphere of this scenario of high raw material prices with a greater regulation that comes across in the study, and that is somehow something that we are foreseeing in our case, given this increase in prices and with this project. I would like to ask you to discuss what, in your view, would be the main issues for the next few years and how the entrepreneurial world could have an impact on this.
Thanks, Alejandra. Look, I think there's two parts to that question. So first up, let me talk about high commodity prices. I've long ago given up trying to predict what the prices of commodities are going to be more than about 12 months out. And don't get me wrong, when I look at the world at the moment, I think there's definitely a sentiment across the globe that people want to be coming out of COVID in a very strong fashion, inducing growth. I think electrification and decarbonization are absolutely trends that create much more demand for copper. And I think the very fact of underinvestment over the last decade in a lot of copper jurisdictions will result in sort of a supply-demand imbalance that I think will result in higher copper prices. That won't last though. Make no bones about it. What will happen is that will induce new supply basically coming online in other countries that are lower grade. And we will see that play through. And even if that doesn't, I have no doubt in my mind that a substitution will play out through aluminium or other products. So that's, I think it's really important to understand and stay grounded on the fact that when prices are high, it's great for a period of time, but it never lasts. Mining is a cyclical industry, and what comes up, goes up, will come down, and vice versa. Now, coming back into your point, though, in terms of what do I see the trends moving forward? Look, I think the regulatory environment will change a fair bit over the next couple of years. So I have no doubt in my mind that we are going to see more around water regulation, more around environmental regulation, more around how we interact with our communities and the connectedness beside that. From my perspective, when I think about BHP overall as a company, I look at the world and say, we need to recognize that we're going to need to have minerals. And as a human being and as a member of the Chilean society, if we're going to have minerals, I want to be a part of a company and lead an industry that's the best possible at doing those things, whether it's communities, water, power, emissions, safety, and to get ahead of the curve. And I think that applies also to innovators and entrepreneurs, recognizing that big organizations are not always going to be the fastest to move. It's super important to actually leverage other skills and other talents and bring their agility into the world that we're moving to moving forward. Thanks, Alejandra.
Thank you, Rag. Muy interesante insight el último, ¿no?
Thank you, Rag. A very interesting insight that you have given us, especially what you said at the end, in the sense that we must be able to react with dynamism. We must react quickly. Osvaldo, the question for you is, well, we see that digitalization is no longer a great priority for mining because it has already been incorporated in many companies. But that is a major driving force for productivity together with increasingly scarce resources. How do you view the situation in Chile, the main obstacles for the incorporation of digitalization and the incorporation of these types of technologies, obstacles or barriers? Thank you, Alejandra. I'd just like to mention a study that we conducted in Cesco with the support of IGF, ISB, and the collaboration of German cooperation, GTZ. We have just concluded a study talking about the technological impacts of copper mining in the Andean region and the type of public policies that are required so that we may successfully adopt technological change. And one of the main results associated to the obstacles that you referred to, Alejandra, is linked to the fact that in order to face up to these obstacles, we need to have a more systemic perspective. Mining is an industry that is trying to break away from silos when we must also break away from internal silos. We must break away from silos within internal operations and our relationships with our environment, but we must also, in a way, break down the silos between digital technologies and other technologies. So we need a perspective that incorporates the effects of digitalization and the incorporation of other technologies, for example, low emission technologies, electromobility, or perhaps solutions associated to circular economies. If we break away from that fragmentation in order to look at the different technological components, well, all that forms part of the elements that are present in order to make headway in terms of the obstacles that existed. Now, if we look at digitalization, Chile already has a digital agenda in place, and this has been developed. The infrastructure has developed. We have integrated operational centers in all companies, but we are falling back in terms of technology for sustainability, and we have important efforts underway in that sense. For example, green hydrogen, and curiously enough, if we don't advance sufficiently quickly in that agenda, that may have an impact on other agendas as well. It could be that the agenda with related to non-digital technologies, well, there we have less ability linked to those issues, and these issues were not so present or not with the strength that we see today in the decision-making on the part of investors and markets that I believe will be the main triggering force in order to align the speed of the digital agenda with the agenda of these other technologies that I mentioned. And through that, we will be able to establish or strike a balance in terms of a more integrated or systemic perspective of technological change in order to face up to these obstacles. Perfect. Thank you, Osvaldo. Eduardo, I'd like to begin with you the second round of questions related to the issue that was mentioned by Osvaldo. I'd like to talk a little bit about human capital. We have said, or we have talked about the trends that we foresee for 2040 with regards to new jobs and so on. In what areas or regions do you believe that these new jobs could be present, and what the service-based mining, what are the implications of that? Well, this is an excellent question. Osvaldo has talked about robotics, automation, the use of drones, automated vehicles, remotely controlled operations and so on. I believe that all that will improve efforts both in terms of exploration and in terms of operations. We conducted a study where we were able to see how these innovations in order to redesign the traditional jobs in mining industry and how these areas, both in terms of drills, in terms of geologists, surveyors and so on, will imply a very strong demand of operators capable of operating both with remote vehicles, but also using digital technologies. So there'll be an increase of demand in terms of competencies that are required by these digital technologies in all areas of the value chain of the mining industry. In some areas where we believe this will, well, rather than areas, some of the abilities that we believe will be needed in the future are primarily all skills, all technological skills, data analysis, programming, design of mathematical models and so on, but also some soft skills such as change management, creativity, productivity. All this will be required in order to take this mining that we have today to the mining of the future that will be a mining which will be much more automated and much more technological in nature. Now, the good news that is present in our regions is that clearly there is today here in Chile a very high concentration in the metropolitan region, especially of services and of companies. And there is also an important trend in some mining companies to create a remote control operations in other regions of the country. And so the question that comes to mind is why not in other regions? Why don't we implement a hub for remote operations in the city of Concepcion in the south of Chile, or in Frutillar in the extreme south? I'd love to be there working by the lakes, but these are issues that 2 years ago we would never even have considered. But today, with the strengthening of technology and with distance work, we can think about models and we can find jobs in a much wider ranging fashion. And the other question is whether jobs will be modified and redesigned. We predicted that we will have more jobs that will be necessary, both directly in the mining industry in order to apply this technology, but also in the services industry. These are other types of maintainers, other types of consultants, other types of engineers, other types of services that will be required in order to make the mining of the future a reality. Thank you, Eduardo. I couldn't be more in agreement with you in the sense that indeed we will require other jobs, and this is not a threat. And now I have a question for Rag. Another trend that comes across in the study, and this forms part of business as usual, is the technology in mining process, for example, in exploration. Are local suppliers willing to participate in the development of this technology, and not only to become users of this technology? Are companies, for example, BHP, planning R&D in a collaborative fashion in order to develop new solutions and capabilities at a local level?
Thanks, Alejandra. And listen, I think that's absolutely a truism for the industry moving forward. Be honest with you, though, I actually want to come back to Eduardo's question for a second, because I think he had a super exciting one, and I think some ideas there that I want to build on as well is that one of the things I think is so exciting coming out of the pandemic is technology has demonstrated what is possible in terms of remote work. And I think we've been forced into an environment where we have to demonstrate the new capabilities and technologies and the uses that sit out there. So I am very aligned with Eduardo's views that we can do these jobs anywhere. And we need to continue to push that boundary, because to attract the best possible people to our industry, we need to create environments where it's not just working at a mine site or somewhere remote. Now, I make no bones about it. The reality is that a lot of our communities want to ensure that there is investment in those communities and that there does remain a local presence. I think it is super important that we actually make sure that we're actually building in and investing in those communities. Now, coming to your point around local suppliers and innovators, this is foundational. And what I find with a lot of local suppliers is, if you help them understand what the challenge is, they can be so dynamic in terms of what they can bring in terms of technology and the pace that they can actually bring into new jobs and transitioning into new abilities in terms of what they can supply to the mining industry. Now, for BHP, what we're doing is actually partnering not only with local suppliers, but with other big mining companies like Rio Tinto and Vale. And actually, just yesterday, we actually announced basically a challenge called the Charge on Innovation Challenge, which is really focusing on how do we actually work with others to induce innovative technology, looking at decarbonization efforts across the industry. How do we actually accelerate that? And we see that as being something key and fundamental that will draw in not only current suppliers, but other entrepreneurs and people from other fields to actually bring them in.
Gracias, Rack. Muy interesante. Nuevamente.
Thank you, Rack. Very interesting. Again, that coordinated approach that you refer to, Osvaldo. You're the last one in this second round of questions. An issue that has been at the very center of the agenda over the past few weeks, and that we have already discussed in this panel, is the mining royalty and the future of mining. I would like to know your opinion around the main issues that should be taken into consideration in this discussion, and that should be included in an eventual modification of the taxation on mining. Thank you, Alejandra. That's the million-dollar question. I'll also ask the other panelists the same questions so that they can be prepared to answer. Well, first of all, I think we have to talk about the context. We know that there are fiscal needs, and it's legitimate to discuss taxation reforms to cater for those needs to have a greater public budget. The challenge, however, is to establish a discussion that is rigorous, that is open, that is collaborative in fashion, taking into consideration that we must coherently tackle at least three objectives from my viewpoint. The first one is that there is an alleviation of the crisis that we're going through. The second objective is how this modification helps economic recovery. And the third objective is how these modifications support transformations in order to improve the competitiveness of the economy and the development of the country in the long term. In this sense, I believe that the discussion on the modification of the royalty that is underway in Chile is still underway. It is not finished because we're still not aware of the impact that it would have upon a recovery or upon the activation of the economy, including the mining sector. In addition, we must also take into consideration the whole taxation system and not only the specific impact of the royalty. We know that the rates that are being proposed now, and this was mentioned beforehand, are absolutely excessive if we compare them to the rates of other mining countries such as Canada, Australia, Peru, and others. And an important set of mines, especially those that are in the fourth quartile of costs, would become unfeasible. And that, we believe, is something that we hope will be corrected. And given the quality of the information that is provided today by companies, it seems much more reasonable and appropriate for the royalty to be estimated upon margins and not upon sales. And it also seems reasonable that there be a progressive impact there, that the greater the margins, the greater the rates. And with regards to transformations for the development of the country, the taxation system must mean that mining can contribute, can continue to contribute for many more decades to the development of the country. And one aspect that has to be present in this discussion is not only the taxation burden, but also the architecture, the system of incentives created in terms of taxes. And it would be very interesting to investigate a Roma type of taxes that have an impact upon investment decisions in areas that that are more effective in terms of savings of the factors that we have discussed here. And lastly, I believe that we must make an important effort. Not only we cannot just look at mining as a milk cow, but rather an industry that can help the economy, incorporate knowledge, and shape the economy so that it can become much more sustainable. Those are some of the factors that I believe would have to be present in this very complex debate.
Thank you so much, Osvaldo. We are a little bit short on time, but I want to hear if we want anything added to what Osvaldo said. Any of other panel members? Or Eduardo, do you want to start? I can start. Very briefly, we have to divide this discussion into two spheres. We have to think about the contribution that the mining industry makes to Chile, and then we have to think about taxation, which is what we're discussing. For me, it's very clear that the mining industry is contributing disproportionately to Chile, perhaps to a degree we don't even understand. We think about we're 50% of exports, we're 10% of GDP, up to 800,000 indirect jobs. There are studies that show that for every direct job created in the mining industry, there are 6.5 other indirect jobs created in Chile. We have to think about the number of people involved here. So there's a clear contribution, not only that, but also research and development, to communities, to the people, to the entire ecosystem. If we specifically talk about taxation, there is specific taxation for mining. There is a specific tax structure for mining. It's between 5 and 14% of the EBIT of the mining company. The bill that is now sitting in the parliament, and from my standpoint, it never should even have been born in the parliament. It should have been born through a collective conversation with the mining industry, but that's another point. It's there or whatever. But there's no impact study about what it's going to do for copper and lithium. They don't have detailed information. They don't know how it's going to affect the industry. And it's a bill that could have an impact for the next 30 years on our industry. So if you have a poorly designed, deficient bill, and if it somehow is enacted, we're talking about a 30-year impact that's going to be very negative for all of the Chileans who rely on sustainable, profitable mining that is efficient to continue being the motor driving growth in our country. Thank you, Eduardo. Ragnar, do you want to add something?
Look, I'll keep my comments short. I suppose representing a mining company in this conversation, you might have a view as to what my view or perspective is. So let me take a step back and represent this a bit more holistically. From my perspective, mining companies play a role in society. And when I take a look at where Chile is at the moment, I completely understand that there's absolutely a voice that has been very loudly spoken in Chile that has basically sort of said, look, we want to see change on a constitutional basis. I do understand that we've got a pandemic with very high bills associated with that, and a real differentiation amongst the population in terms of what those bills might look like. And I also do understand that we're in a spot where we see a commodity that's actually doing very well. And so I think it's natural for folks at large who don't have all the information and statistics to sit there and say, hey, look, we'd like some more of that pie. The reality is, though, is that when a company like a BHP comes in to invest, we don't invest on what we expect for the next 12 months. We invest for basically what we're expecting for the next 50 to 100 years. And there will be decades where we actually do not make a lot of money. And one of my minds in particular has not made a cent in a decade, but we continue to ride that through in terms of the cycle because we recognize we are more than just about profit. We're about building communities. We're about providing jobs. We're about a whole host of other things that sit out there. So from my perspective, look, I really welcome some democratic debate here, but I think that's something that's actually a bit lacking at the moment. And I'm worried that without that debate, there'll be some serious unintended consequences about what this can do, not only for the industry, but for the entire economy. And so I hope that we can have an in-depth, rational discussion to actually get across this more broadly, to actually ensure that there's a sense across society that mining is actually doing its fair share.
Créeme que estamos mucho trabajando para que se produzca esa conversación y esa
Yes,
discusión.
we are striving to get that serious cross-cutting conversation in the upcoming weeks. So as I said before, we are running out of time, but I do want to at least bring in 1 or 2 questions from our audience. Ragnar, we're going to continue with you. What is the local impact of depleted reserves, and what new methods of extraction or refining, although perhaps not so relevant to BHP in Chile, what other methods are being implemented to counteract that impact?
Thanks, Alejandra. And I actually think super relevant to Chile, because what I see, let me play that on 2 folds. One, I think we've talked about technology a fair bit, but mainly about equipment autonomy. So drones, automated trucks, automated drills. I actually see decision autonomy as potentially the single biggest unlock for us in terms of what technology can actually bring into the Chilean mining sector moving forward. And we're doing a lot of work with that already, using main and large technology suppliers across the globe who have got views in terms of algorithms and different information that we can bring in, which enables us to harness and actually extract lower grade ore than we have in the possible to actually turn that into a profitable venture. Now, if I was to get into the physical innovations, I actually see sulfide leaching as the single biggest holy grail in the copper industry. And I think a massive, massive unlock for the Chilean mining sector, and something that we're spending a lot of time and focus on, not only because we have infrastructure built to with oxide leaching, that the ability to actually transition sulfide leach product into that is a major unlock potentially to move forward. So that to me is probably the 2 areas that I see major focus for us.
Muy interesante, muchas gracias, Rag. Esta pregunta es para Eduardo.
Thank you so much. I have a question for Eduardo. If we think about rising prices for copper in Chile, how do you think that this is going to affect the industry here in Chile, and what can be done to undermine or to ameliorate any possible consequences? Alejandra, you had poor audio for the first half of the question. Can you say it again? What do you think about the threat of other ore or other items that may replace copper? And what can we do to ameliorate the consequences of that if prices keep rising? I think we heard a little bit about this. We want to be, we know that we are a commodity where prices are cyclical. We know that when prices rise, it can open the door to other ores like aluminum, other ores that might replace or step in for copper and could undermine copper. But I don't think it's so likely. I think it's a far-off scenario still. I think it will stabilize. Predicting copper prices is impossible. We don't know where it's going to go. 1 year ago, if you had asked me where we would be above 4.5 right now, I would say no way, and I would have been 100% mistaken. So rather than thinking about where copper is going to go, or the risk of copper being supplanted by another type of ore or another type of technology, I think the industry just has to take advantage of this moment right now. We have to make the right moves, the right investments, resolve the problems ahead of us, and try not to raise costs, because that's a very big challenge for the industry. Sometimes we're like, oh, copper prices are so high, great, we can let costs go up. And then there's a price correction, and then we are in a difficult situation. It can be a lot more difficult to cut costs later on. So I think the mining industry needs to keep that in mind, take advantage of the moment we're in, keep investing, keep encouraging new ways to produce and be more productive without having significant cost hikes. Thank you, Eduardo. I have a final question for Osvaldo. We've actually got tons of questions coming in from the audience, a really engaged audience, but for Osvaldo specifically. What role should these new suppliers, like described in the study, play? We've had the same problem where we've lost the first half of the question. Alejandra, we're having a poor connection. We'll ask again. Specific question. What new services can these new mining providers offer? I think the EY study covered a broad gamut of services, everything from exploration to how copper can be sold, maybe mining as a service. I think it's going to be about having a good estimate of what type of jobs will be coming. There's going to be more sophisticated jobs, and seeing how we can have this talent throughout the entire territory. There's going to be rising job demand, especially for sophisticated type jobs. So it's not only about mining and providers globally, but how to attract the best talent to tackle these solutions that we're going to need in the future, and how to get these pockets of talent to spring up in Chile. We were hearing from Eduardo about operations. It would be great to have everything from Frutillar to the north operating with excellence, with digital tools. And I know I'm going on a little bit now, but if you think about the debate about Brexit, do you remember that debate was going on? And we thought about, why did people vote for Brexit? Why did they vote the way they voted? And it turned out that there were two cities in England that had significant growth in productivity, London and Edinburgh. And those two places were generating the most value, so talent was being sucked to those cities, the most productive cities. And other places were lagging in creating value, and the benefits weren't going to the rest of the country. And this created tension between those two places that had productivity and the rest. So we have to prevent that from happening. We have to do that same effort. We have to prevent all the development and knowledge from being concentrated in just one place. And it's going to be a reflection of that. This is going back to the question from the beginning. If we think about communities, we have to have knowledge being shared, and we have to have engagement and relationships to not exclude anybody in society, so that there's no sensation of resentment or being left out or being left behind. So that's something the government has to worry about, and also companies, to address that topic and to face the challenge that the minister outlined for us. Thank you so much, Osvaldo. So we are now at time. I want to thank all of our panel members, Ragnar, Eduardo, and Osvaldo. And I also want to thank all of our participants for being here with us on Zoom this morning. And I will now give the floor to Eduardo.
Thank you, Ragnar, Osvaldo, everyone, the minister. It's been, I hope we can again have something like this. May you all look after yourselves, and see you. Bye-bye.
La descarbonización, la digitalización y la diversificación están cambiando los modelos de minería y creando nuevas oportunidades. Esto significa que la minería en el futuro será muy diferente a la de hoy. ¿Pero qué cambiará exactamente y cómo pueden adaptarse los mineros? Una mina del futuro. Para el 2040, la inteligencia artificial y cognitiva guiará la exploración rentable que abre nuevos descubrimientos. Todo está automatizado: camiones, palas, equipos de soporte y procesamiento. Junto con mejorar la seguridad, la automatización y la electrificación permiten un acceso más profundo en las minas subterráneas. Los repuestos se imprimen en 3D según sea necesario, lo que elimina la necesidad de bodegas. Las microredes alimentan las minas con energía renovable, reduciendo costos y emisiones de carbono. Las minas del futuro no utilizan agua, lo que ayuda a la licencia para operar y la sostenibilidad. Aproximadamente las 3/4 partes de los roles se rediseñan o mejoran, y gran parte de la mano de obra minera trabaja de forma remota a través de centros operativos integrados. Transformar para el futuro requerirá fundamentalmente remodelar los modelos operativos y comerciales. EY ayuda a las empresas mineras a adoptar un enfoque holístico, a impulsar una estrategia verdaderamente digital, a crear asociaciones de confianza con las partes interesadas, pensar de manera diferente sobre cómo atraer capital y crear una fuerza laboral con las habilidades y la mentalidad flexible para desbloquear las oportunidades que ofrece la mina del futuro.